The scripture today is from 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 through 17. Now, there was a woman who had been married to a member of a group of prophets. She appealed to Elisha, saying, "My husband, your servant, is dead. You know how he feared the Lord, but now someone he owed money to has come to take my 2 children away as slaves." Elisha said to her, "What can I do for you? Tell me what you still have left in the house." She said, "Your servant has nothing at all in the house except a small jar of oil." He said, "Go out and borrow containers from all your neighbors. Get as many empty containers as possible. Then go in and close the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all those containers. Set each one aside when it's full." She left Elisha and closed the door behind her and her sons. They brought her containers as she kept on pouring. When she had filled the containers, she said to her son, "Bring me another container." He said to her, "There aren't any more." Then the oil stopped flowing, and she reported this to the man of God. He said, "Go, sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what remains." One day, Elisha went to Shunem. A rich woman lived there. She urged him to eat something, so whenever he passed by, he would stop in to eat some food. She said to her husband, "Look, I know that he is a holy man of God, and he passes by regularly. Let's make a small room on the roof. We'll set up a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp for him there. Then when he comes to us, he can stay there." So one day, Elisha came there, headed to the room on the roof, and lay down. He said to his servant Gehazi, "Call this Shunammite woman." Gehazi called her, and she stood before him. Elisha then said to Gehazi, "Say to her, 'Look, you've gone to all this trouble for us. What can I do for you? Is there anything I can do on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army?" She said, "I'm content to live with my own people." Elisha asked, "So what can be done for her?" Gehazi said, "Well, she doesn't have a son, and her husband is old." Elisha said, "Call her." So Gehazi called her, and she stood at the door. Elisha said, "About this time next year, you will be holding a son in your arms." But she said, "No, man of God, sir, don't lie to your servant." But the woman conceived and gave birth to a son at about the same time the next year. That was what Elisha had promised her. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Lynn, for the blessing of the reading. Please pray with us. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, for you are our rock, our strength, and our Redeemer. Amen. In the past 2 weeks, I was apart from you. I was traveling in a different part of the world, and I missed you. I'm looking forward to an extended time of being in rhythm of life with you. This was a good week for me to be thinking about the contrast between what it's like to live in ordinary time, a routine, a regular relationship, a sense of neighborhood, versus what it's like to be displaced, even temporarily, even for something good, and seeing it from a different perspective. We're getting our stories of Elisha the prophet after a long bunch of stories this summer about Elijah. This part of the book of 2 Kings is a sequence of household stories, little intimate stories where Elijah is with a small group. Elisha is establishing himself as a prophet and showing what it looks like for him to be in ministry in the neighborhood, in ordinary time, in connection. But these household stories serve as a counterpoint to the nation stories of the rest of Elisha's narrative, where Elijah, the mentor, his place was in the wilderness. Elisha's place is in centers of national power. For most of his ministry, we see him going back and forth between battlefield and palace. He is talking to all the leaders. You even heard a little bit of it in the second part of the reading this morning, where Elisha is talking to the rich woman about the rich woman and saying, wow, she's given us so much. Is there something I can do for her in the capital? Can I talk to a general about her or something? And she responds, no, I'm happy in my neighborhood with my people. Yeah. These household stories are a counterpoint to the nation stories of the rest of Elisha's narrative. There is tremendous national upheaval in Elisha's time. Elijah, the mentor, showed us in these sort of grand mythical acts how the leadership that was supposed to serve God and God's people failed to do so. We had big superhero and supervillain stories in Elijah's time. Elisha's time is the time of consequences. This is the fallout that comes from those big, grand gestures, the way it works its way through a society and a people and a history to change our sense of who we are and to put deep things into our stories of conflict and peacemaking. But although there is tremendous national upheaval in Elisha's time, these stories, these household neighborhood stories, serve as a reminder to us of the good news that God is present to your reality and to the reality of those who are suffering anywhere. These stories are a reminder that God is not a God of battlefields and palaces. God is a God of the people, of the neighborhood, of the individual heart, and the relationship of community. The consequences of brokenness in those relationships, sometimes end up in the halls of power or in international conflict. But that's not where God seeks to be in relation with us. God seeks to be in relation with us in our kitchen, on our roof deck, in our private places of prayer and worry. The good news is God is present to your reality, your personal reality, and to the reality of those who are suffering anywhere. Whatever is happening around the world, God is big enough to meet it. But God comes to those conflicts and gestures informed with the reality of what it is like to have a human heart. What it is like to listen to the cries of anyone who is suffering. And so we have these two stories this morning. One of a woman who is in debt slavery, whose children are about to be confiscated to serve as slaves because of their poverty. And in the story of a woman who has wealth, but is missing something else in her life about which she has deep yearning. The prophet encounters these people who are living radically different lives and enters their home. And the solutions are found there too. One of the things that studying this text has me realizing is that there is no condition in which it is appropriate to exclude our faith from our life. If this relationship is true about Elisha's ministry, that he's a part of big global actions that have flowed from miraculous events, and he is also in someone's house, then there is no condition in which it is appropriate to exclude our faith from our life. Not in the choices that we make for our neighborhood, not in the choices that we make for our own families, not in the choices that we make for the countries with which we are entwined around the world. Our faith should always shape our interpretation and our response, whether we're at work, or at home, or checking a box on a survey, or answering a question from a pollster. Okay. So what do we do when these two things are both so present to us? When our hearts are full of concern about our own well-being or of longing for something we have not been able to bring into reality in our personal lives, and also surrounded by news updates about suffering that is happening on this massive scale, almost beyond our ability to imagine. Something that I see also in these stories is that when Elisha seeks to respond to the petition or to the kindness of the people he's in relation with, he gives them a solution that comes from what they already have and are. For the poor woman who's up against a system that has impoverished her and put her back up against the wall, he says, go to your neighbors. Go to your neighbors' houses, because they probably have something like this floating around in a kitchen or a cupboard. If you can't see what I'm pointing to a classic church coffee carafe. And to a plastic pitcher, of which there are many in this building, that go through the cycles of serving and dishwasher and back in the cabinet and serving again. These workhorse things. Elisha says to the woman who is in dire straits, go to your neighbors, because there's probably something like this floating around in any of their households. Go to your local church. I bet they've got a few of these. Collect as many as you can find. God will fill them all with abundance that you can live on for the rest of your days. When the rich woman takes from what is easy for her to give, she's got plenty of space She has plenty of money to furnish somewhere that the prophet can rest during his travels. When he inquires, what is missing? How can I respond to your kindness with a kindness? What he discovers is that she has been unable to conceive a child. She's rich in belongings, but she does not have the family she longs for. But she already has, in her partnership with her spouse, in the way that God made her, everything that she needs. And so she is given a child. God draws from what God has already given us to bring about transformation, whether we're in the position of need or we're one of the neighbors with the pitchers, or whether we are the local church. Jarvis Williams is a pro-democracy organizer who was once a pastor. And interviewed about how to respond in moments like these, he says these things: I would argue, particularly for Christians, the agency of one person in their neighborhood can have ripple effects that you could never quantify. It does no good for you to be talking about justice at the national level while you allow authoritarians to rule your community. He says, give your best expression to the things you are directly connected to. And when there's leftover room, do the next larger thing. If you do it that way, the likelihood that you are overwhelmed is a lot different, because you're actively watching your impact, your failures, your successes. You're actively moving people that you have influence over. I appreciate that image of the rippling out. Especially because one of the stories that we heard this morning, the story of the rich woman, doesn't end here. There's so many stories from the gospel stories, but also from these stories of patriarchs and heroes in the Hebrew Bible that happen just for a glimpse. Characters come into their lives, they find themselves in situations, they respond in the moment, and that's the end of it. But this story of the Shunammite woman continues, actually, and she shows up with several future chapters to her story. In fact, she herself ends up speaking in the halls of power of the experience she had of God. We never know how what we do in community might ripple out. As I was traveling and away from this community in these past couple of weeks, I was hearing from a different perspective about things that are going on all over the world. I didn't just get to visit friends who, like us, are concerned with faith and justice and their own community lives. I was also exposed to artistic expressions and in close contact with people who live in countries all over the world. Wes and I got to go to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and see just a handful of shows. And this is a festival that allows people who would not normally be able to have their work produced or to find necessarily an audience to show what they're working on. Sometimes it's a grouping of 10 or 15 people in the audience. Sometimes it's just one person who's telling a story that comes from their own family. And sometimes it happens on a much broader scale. But being able to see what people worry about, what they think about, and the way that they offer hope from their perspectives is so inspiring and so important in terms of understanding the way we are connected to other people. I was convicted by some of the art that we saw, and I wanted to learn more and think more about our place in community and my place as your pastor. And so I read an article by Anne Applebaum in The Atlantic, which is about Sudan. In that article, she writes, about 14 million people have been displaced by years of fighting, more than in Ukraine and Gaza combined. Half the population is expected to go hungry this year. She continues, but no statistics can express the sense of purposelessness, of powerlessness, of meaninglessness that the war has left behind alongside the physical destruction. She was visiting a camp where refugees were living, and she said there was no school at the camp and no work. There was nothing to do in the 100-degree heat except wait. As she thinks about how this affects her perspective, she writes, greed, nihilism, and transactionalism are reshaping the politics of the rich world too. As old rules and norms fall away, they are not replaced by a new structure. They are replaced by nothing. Can that be? Can that really be? One of the differences that I think is very important between these two thinkers is that Anne Applebaum is writing in a general publication that's going to go out to all audiences, and she's not writing from the position of a person of faith, though she may be one. It's not her voice in this article. She's looking at the politics, and she's looking at the experiences of the individual in their own home, yes. But Jarvis Williams is writing as a pastor, speaking as a pastor. And he is speaking about what we can think about as Christians. We've been having conversations of one type or another for a couple of years now in this church about how God is calling us and what our vision for ministry may be. One way that this came up was when we were doing an assessment of what the community needs and what our gifts are, what our concerns are locally, and what we can do back when I was new here and we were talking about whether or not to sell the parsonage. Another iteration came along when we had the opportunity to participate in a group hosted by the foundation called Activate, which was specifically about helping us learn what it means to focus in ministry and bring together our many talents, convictions, and energies into a direction where we can make an impact, make ripples, in which we were invited to look at a 1-mile radius around our church. And some of this conversation has been happening this summer as we've been invited to get together and sort of process together what we've collected and learned from those experiences, and where we feel like God is nudging us as we reflect on those conversations. Here's what's happened. We have felt a direction. We have felt something quietly right about a form of action we can take here in the community. And what we are contemplating now, what I'm inviting you to be in prayer about now, where our conversation is going now, is that we are feeling called to become the static site for family promise in our building, on our properties. If we were to do this, the reason that we're feeling called in this direction is because it would make a real difference in terms of the efficiency of the ministry that they do, which is keeping people out of homelessness or helping them get out of homelessness and housing insecurity, family intact. Partners stay together, children stay with their parents. And we have found that the model and the strategies that they employ are successful, that families go through this program and they don't fall back into homelessness afterward. It would make their ministry more efficient, but it would also allow us to do more with the resources we have. This amazing building, this gift of land, this wonderful connection, this relationship we've been building. One of the things God is doing in me as I listened to the stories of the voices from around the world and became, I confess it, overwhelmed by all of the suffering that God hears and carries every day, every minute. I remembered what Jarvis Williams said, that we cannot, as Christians, do nothing. We cannot feel like we are close to God or walking in the way of Christ if we shut our ears or close our hearts to the pain of the world. But what we can do is give our best expression to the things we are directly connected to. And pray that what we do when we come into the household like Elisha did will ripple out because we've asked for God's help. Anne Applebaum wrote, "Greed, nihilism, and transactionalism are reshaping the politics of the rich world too. As old rules and norms fall away, they are not replaced by a new structure. They are replaced by nothing." This is a call to action, worthy of a day when we are talking about the prophets. Let them not be replaced by nothing. Let them be replaced by us.